Caleb Whitmore slid an empty cardboard box across the conference table before anyone told him to leave. The sound was quiet, almost polite, but it stopped every conversation in the room. Damien Blackwell leaned back in his leather chair, one hand resting on a silver pen that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment. Around him, vice presidents and department heads stared at Caleb as if they were waiting for the punchline. "There it is," Damien said with a faint smile. "If you're so convinced this rollout is a mistake, quit." Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. Damien wasn't trying to fire him. He was making a point. A 41-year-old single father with a mortgage, a daughter in elementary school, and no wealthy relatives didn't walk away from a 6-figure job. Everyone in that room believed the same thing. Caleb reached into his desk drawer. He picked up a framed picture of his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, grinning with missing front teeth after catching her first fish the previous summer. He placed it gently inside the box. Only then did the silence become uncomfortable. "Before we go any further, tell me something about yourself. How old are you, where are you watching from, and have you ever found yourself trapped between doing what's right and protecting the people you love?" 20 minutes earlier, the morning had begun like any other Tuesday. The distribution headquarters outside Columbus, Ohio, buzzed with forklifts, delivery schedules, and endless emails. Caleb had spent nearly 14 years building systems that kept thousands of shipments moving without customers ever noticing the work behind them. He liked that. Good operations were invisible. When everything worked, nobody applauded. When something failed, everyone noticed. That was the job. Caleb had never dreamed of becoming an executive. He preferred solving problems to giving speeches, and after his wife passed away 6 years earlier, ambition had quietly taken a back seat to something far more important. Every weekday at exactly 7:15 a.m., he drove Lily to school. Every Thursday evening, they cooked dinner together, even if dinner was nothing more exciting than grilled cheese, sandwiches and tomato soup. Every Friday, they watched an old movie before bed. Those routines mattered more to him than another promotion ever could. Which was exactly why everyone assumed Damien's challenge would work. Caleb had too much to lose. The meeting itself had been called to celebrate a massive retail contract, one that promised record profits if the company could accelerate deliveries before the holiday season. The celebration ended the moment a revised operations schedule appeared on the screen. Inspection checkpoints had been reduced. Verification procedures had been combined. Several experienced supervisors would be replaced with temporary crews to save both time and money. To most people in the room, it looked efficient. To Caleb, it looked fragile. He wasn't worried about one shipment. He was worried about what happened after the first shortcut became normal. He cleared his throat. "I can't approve this plan." The room had gone still. Damien's smile never changed. "Then maybe you're in the wrong company." And now, with his daughter's picture resting inside a cardboard box, Caleb quietly reached for the next item on his desk. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because there were some decisions he had already made long before anyone dared him to make them. Caleb closed the lid of the cardboard box before anyone could say another word. No dramatic speech. No slammed door. No pointing fingers across the conference table. He simply nodded once, picked up the box, and walked out. The silence followed him into the hallway. Behind him, conversations slowly restarted, first in whispers, then in cautious voices. A few employees avoided eye contact as he passed. Others looked down at their laptops, pretending to be busy. Nobody wanted to become the next person Damien Blackwell noticed. As the elevator doors closed, Caleb finally exhaled. His hands were steady. His stomach wasn't. The ride to the parking garage felt longer than it ever had. When he reached his pickup truck, he carefully placed the box on the passenger seat. On top sat Lily's framed photograph, smiling beneath a baseball cap that was much too big for her. He rested one hand on the steering wheel without starting the engine. For the first time all morning, the numbers began running through his head. Mortgage. Health insurance. Utilities. Groceries. School supplies. The small savings account he'd been building for Lily's future. He knew every dollar almost by memory. Being a single father meant there was no second paycheck waiting at home. Every decision eventually landed on his shoulders. His phone buzzed. Victoria Sloan. He stared at the screen before answering. "Hey. Are you seriously gone?" she asked. "I am." "You didn't even argue." "There wasn't anything left to argue." Victoria sighed. "I don't think you understand what's happening upstairs." "I think I do." "No." Her voice dropped. "They handed your entire operation to me." Caleb closed his eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. I know. They think I can simply replace 14 years of experience overnight. You can handle the work. That's not the point." She paused. "They're treating people like interchangeable parts." Caleb looked through the windshield at workers loading trailers across the yard. "They'd been doing that for a long time. You could have warned me. I didn't know I'd be walking out today." Either of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Victoria said quietly, "Take care of your daughter." "You too." The call ended. Caleb drove across town just in time to join the afternoon pickup line outside Lily's elementary school. Parents stood beside SUVs and pickup trucks, chatting about soccer practice, homework, and weekend plans. Lily burst through the front doors carrying an oversized poster board decorated with construction paper trees. She spotted her father immediately. "Dad!" She ran toward the truck, climbed inside, and held up the project proudly. "I got an A- because my volcano wasn't realistic enough." Caleb laughed. "I've never heard a teacher complain about a volcano being unrealistic. Apparently lava doesn't sparkle." "It definitely doesn't sparkle." She grinned. For a moment, everything felt normal. On the drive home, she talked nonstop about an upcoming 5th grade camping trip. "There are cabins this year instead of tents," she said excitedly. "Mrs. Donnelly said we'll learn how to build a fire without matches. And Emma's parents already signed her permission slip." Caleb tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The trip cost more than he wanted to admit. Until that morning, paying for it hadn't been a concern. Now every expense carried a different weight. "You'll have fun," he said carefully. "I know. Can we fill out my form tonight?" He forced a smile. "Absolutely." The lie came out smoother than he expected. That evening, while Lily spread homework across the kitchen table, Caleb opened his laptop after she wasn't looking. He reviewed bank balances. Savings. Checking. Emergency fund. He deleted the draft email he'd started to a recruiter. It felt dishonest to apply for jobs while his emotions were still running the conversation. Instead, he opened a spreadsheet. One column listed every monthly expense. Another listed everything that could disappear. Streaming subscriptions. Restaurant meals. Weekend outings. Even then, the numbers refused to cooperate. Across the room, Lily hummed softly while coloring the title on her science project. She looked up. "Do you think bears are scared of people?" "Sometimes." "What makes them scared?" Caleb thought for a moment. "Usually something they don't understand." She nodded as if that answered everything. He wished life worked that way for adults. Because sitting at the kitchen table with bills scattered in front of him, Caleb realized the hardest part of leaving his job wasn't losing the paycheck. It was pretending everything was still safe while quietly wondering how long he could keep that promise. The empty desk stayed empty. By Wednesday morning, someone had already removed Caleb Whitmore's nameplate from the glass office beside the operations floor. A maintenance worker patched the tiny holes where family photos had once been pinned to the wall. It was as if 14 years of late nights, emergency calls, and impossible deadlines could disappear between one shift and the next. Employees noticed. Nobody mentioned it out loud. Victoria Sloan walked past the office twice before finally stepping inside. The room felt strangely smaller without Caleb's quiet presence. His shelves were bare. The whiteboard that had once been filled with shipping routes and handwritten reminders had been wiped clean. Only a faint outline of blue marker remained where countless solutions had been drawn and erased over the years. A young supervisor appeared at the doorway. "They want you in conference room B." Victoria nodded. Inside, Damien Blackwell was already outlining the accelerated rollout schedule as though nothing unusual had happened. "We're moving forward," he said confidently. "No delays." One manager raised a cautious hand. "What about Caleb's distribution model?" "We'll adjust. The regional coordinators usually checked with him before approving exceptions." Damien didn't hesitate. "They'll check with Victoria now." Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Victoria forced a calm expression. "I'll do everything I can." Damien smiled. "I know you will." The meeting ended quickly, but the workload didn't. Before lunch, Victoria had more than 80 unread emails. Warehouse managers wanted approvals. Drivers reported scheduling conflicts. Retail partners requested exceptions. Questions that Caleb normally answered in minutes now stacked up by the hour. She wasn't overwhelmed because she lacked experience. She was overwhelmed because Caleb had quietly carried responsibilities no one else had fully seen. Late that afternoon, she stood on the observation platform overlooking the main warehouse. Hundreds of workers moved between loading docks with practiced efficiency. Everything looked normal. That almost bothered her more. Systems could appear healthy right before they failed. Her phone buzzed. A warehouse supervisor. "We've got 3 trailers waiting for inspection." "What's the issue?" "The revised checklist skips the secondary verification." Victoria looked toward the printed procedures sitting beside her. The new version did exactly that. She closed her eyes for a brief second. "Use the old checklist?" "That's not what headquarters sent." "I understand." "So, which one?" Victoria hesitated. For the first time since Caleb had left, she understood the position he'd been standing in. Every answer carried consequences. Back across town, Caleb pulled into the driveway of a small dealership. His pickup truck had nearly 200,000 miles on it, but it had never failed him. The salesman walked around it slowly. "It's in decent shape. It runs well. We can offer you this." He slid a printed number across the desk. It was lower than Caleb had hoped. Higher than he had feared. He stared at it for several seconds before quietly signing the paperwork. An hour later he climbed into an older compact sedan with faded paint and worn fabric seats. It wasn't embarrassing. It was practical. When he arrived home, Lily ran outside carrying a backpack almost as big as she was. "You got a different car." "I did." She climbed into the passenger seat, looking around curiously. "It smells funny." Caleb laughed. "That's because it's older. I kind of like it." She buckled her seat belt without another question. As they drove toward the grocery store, she pointed at a bright red pickup passing in the opposite direction. "That one looks like your old truck." "It does." "You miss it?" He glanced at her for a moment before returning his eyes to the road. "A little." She nodded thoughtfully. "I miss Mom sometimes for no reason." The words settled heavily between them. Caleb reached across the center console and squeezed her hand. "So do I." Neither of them said anything else. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Caleb opened another spreadsheet. Selling the truck had bought them time. Not security. Just time. Across the city, Victoria sat alone in the dark operations office, staring at 2 different inspection procedures on her computer screen. One promised speed. The other promised certainty. For the first time, she understood that Caleb hadn't left because he was stubborn. He had left because some decisions kept following you home, long after you walked out of the building. 3 days after Caleb left Blackwell Logistics, the first official letter arrived. It wasn't dramatic. No bold red warning. No legal threats. Just a plain white envelope from the company's health insurance provider. Caleb found it tucked between grocery coupons and a utility bill when he checked the mailbox after work. He slipped it under a stack of papers before walking inside. Lily was already at the kitchen counter, spreading colored pencils across the table. Dad, can you quiz me on state capitals after dinner? You've got it. She smiled and went back to homework while Caleb quietly slid the unopened envelope into a drawer. Not tonight. He wanted one more normal evening. They made spaghetti together, argued playfully about whether mushrooms belonged in pasta sauce, and watched half of an old comedy before Lily yawned her way toward bed. After she fell asleep, Caleb finally opened the letter. His medical coverage, and Lily's, would officially end at the close of the month unless he enrolled in continuation coverage. The monthly premium was far higher than he had expected. He leaned back in the kitchen chair, staring at the numbers until they blurred together. He could manage the mortgage for a while. He could cut expenses. He could drive an older car. But he couldn't pretend health insurance was optional for a growing 10-year-old. The next morning, Caleb left early to meet with a local recruiter. In the rush, he accidentally left the insurance letter beneath a notebook on the kitchen table. An hour later, Lily came downstairs looking for construction paper. She moved the notebook. The envelope slid onto the floor. She wasn't trying to snoop. She simply recognized both her father's name and her own. When Caleb returned home that afternoon, he found her sitting quietly on the porch swing instead of running to greet him. "You read it?" he said softly. She nodded. "You lost your job." "I did." "And our insurance." Another nod. She stared at the wooden porch beneath her sneakers. "What hurts isn't that you quit." Caleb waited. "It's that you kept acting like everything was exactly the same." The words landed harder than anything Damian Blackwell had said in the boardroom. Before Caleb could answer, his phone rang. "Victoria." He stepped into the yard before answering. "I won't keep you long," she said, exhaustion filling her voice. "I need you to understand something." "I'm listening." "I thought your resignation would force management to rethink the rollout." "It didn't?" "No." She let out a slow breath. "They didn't change the plan." "What happened?" "They moved every decision onto the rest of us." Caleb closed his eyes. The pressure didn't disappear. Victoria continued. "It just changed shoulders." After the call ended, Caleb remained standing in the fading afternoon light. He had believed walking away was the cleanest way to protect his principles. Now 2 different people had shown him the same uncomfortable truth. By carrying everything alone, he hadn't spared the people he cared about. He had simply left them carrying burdens they never had the chance to choose. Caleb didn't try to explain himself that evening. For the first time since leaving Blackwell Logistics, he stopped looking for the perfect answer. Instead, he sat beside Lily on the porch swing until the sun disappeared behind the neighboring houses. "I'm sorry," he finally said. She looked up. "I thought I was protecting you." "I know. But protecting you shouldn't mean pretending nothing changed." Lily pulled one knee against her chest. "I don't need to know every grown-up problem." "You don't. But I want to know if we're okay." Caleb smiled sadly. "That's fair." They sat quietly for another minute before he stood. "Come inside." At the kitchen table, Caleb opened his laptop, a yellow legal pad, and a stack of bills he had carefully hidden over the past week. Lily frowned. "I thought you always paid everything online." "I do." "So why are they all out?" "Because we're going to look at them together." Her eyes widened. "Really? You deserve to know what we're dealing with." He drew 3 columns across the legal pad. "Needs. Things we can wait on. Things we can live without." He pointed to the first column. "The mortgage." Lily nodded. "The lights." Another nod. "Food. Definitely food," she said. He smiled. "And your school." She looked relieved. "What about my camping trip?" Caleb paused. "It depends." "On money?" "Yes." She stared at the paper for a few seconds before quietly saying, "Then maybe I don't have to go." "No." He shook his head immediately. "I don't want you giving things up because I made a decision. But we're a team." The words caught him completely off guard. She wasn't asking him to fix everything anymore. She was asking to help carry a tiny part of it. Caleb realized that was exactly what he had refused to let anyone else do. The rest of the evening became unexpectedly peaceful. They searched grocery coupons together, compared prices online, made a list of meals they could cook for less. Lily even suggested skipping pizza delivery nights for a while. "I can learn to make homemade pizza," she said confidently. "It probably won't taste the same." She shrugged. "Then we'll just call it experimental pizza." Caleb laughed harder than he had all week. Across the city, Victoria Sloan sat in a conference room with 4 warehouse supervisors. Each carried a folder filled with unresolved shipment requests. One supervisor pushed his chair back. "I need someone to approve these exceptions." Victoria looked down at the paperwork. Under the previous system, Caleb would have signed them after checking several safety conditions. Now headquarters expected her signature. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked. The room became quiet. "They'll probably find someone else. And if I approve something I'm not comfortable with?" Nobody answered. Because everyone knew. The responsibility would belong to her. That afternoon, Victoria requested a meeting with Damien Blackwell. He welcomed her into his office without looking up from his tablet. "Everything moving on schedule?" "Not exactly." He finally raised his eyes. "The revised process assumes one person can make decisions that used to be shared across several departments. You've been promoted. I've been assigned responsibility. Same difference." "No." Victoria kept her voice calm. "It isn't." Damien leaned back. "Caleb thought the company couldn't function without him." "That's not what happened." "Then explain it." She hesitated. "He wasn't carrying the workload because he wanted to feel important." Damien waited. "He was carrying work other people were never given permission to share." The room fell silent. Damien glanced toward the skyline outside his office window. "You'll adjust." Victoria stood. "I will." She walked to the door before stopping. "But adjustment isn't the same thing as trust." She left before he could answer. Later that evening, Caleb received an email from a recruiter confirming an interview for a regional logistics position the following week. The salary was noticeably lower than his previous job. He read the message twice. Months earlier, he might have dismissed it without a second thought. Now he closed the laptop and carried 2 bowls of homemade pizza dough into the kitchen. Lily had flour on her cheeks and tomato sauce on one elbow. She looked at the lopsided crust and burst into laughter. "It looks terrible." "It really does." "So, should we order pizza instead?" Caleb picked up a handful of shredded cheese. "No." He sprinkled it over the uneven dough. "I think we're exactly where we need to be." For the first time since he packed the cardboard box in Damien Blackwell's boardroom, Caleb stopped measuring success by what he had lost. Instead, he began measuring it by something much harder to earn back: trust. The interview lasted just under 40 minutes. Caleb walked out of the small logistics company's office carrying nothing except a folder with his resume and a polite smile that hid how uncertain he felt. The hiring manager had been honest. "We like your experience," she'd said. "But we're a regional company. We can't match what you made before." "I understand. You'd be supervising a much smaller operation." "I understand that too." She had studied him for a moment. "You don't seem disappointed." Caleb thought about answering with something impressive. Instead, he told the truth. "I'm trying to build a stable life, not chase a title." The manager nodded thoughtfully, shook his hand, and promised to call within the week. Outside, the afternoon air carried the first hint of autumn. Caleb sat in his old sedan for several minutes before starting the engine. A month ago, he would have measured every opportunity against promotions, responsibility, and long-term career growth. Now he found himself asking different questions. Would he be home for dinner? Could he drive Lily to school? Would he spend evenings answering emergency phone calls? Some things had become more valuable after almost disappearing. When he arrived home, Lily was sitting on the front steps with a notebook balanced on her knees. "I made something," she announced. What is it? Our family budget. He laughed softly. You made a budget? She opened the notebook. Across the top she had written in careful handwriting, things that cost $0. Below it was a list. Movie night. Walking the dog next door. Making pancakes. Playing cards. Watching the stars. Reading together. Caleb stared at the page longer than she expected. I figured, she said shyly. If we're saving money, maybe we should remember the free stuff. He sat beside her. I think that's one of the smartest lists I've ever seen. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't miss the truck anymore. No? It was just a truck. He smiled. You're right. At Blackwell Logistics, the atmosphere had changed in quieter ways. Nobody argued openly with Damien Blackwell. Nobody stormed out. But conversations had become shorter. Managers checked emails twice before answering. Supervisors asked for written confirmation instead of verbal instructions. People who once solved problems together were now making sure every decision could be traced back to someone else. Trust had quietly been replaced by caution. Victoria noticed it every day. She spent more time documenting conversations than improving operations. Late one afternoon, she gathered her department leads. I'm changing something, she said. The room looked puzzled. If a decision affects multiple teams, nobody signs a loan anymore. One supervisor frowned. Headquarters won't like that. Maybe not. But it slows everything down. It also means nobody carries the risk by themselves. The room fell silent. Several people exchanged relieved glances. One employee quietly said, Thank you. Victoria hadn't realized how badly everyone needed permission to share responsibility. The next morning, Caleb's phone rang while he was replacing a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. The caller ID surprised him. Damien Blackwell. Caleb let it ring twice before answering. This is Caleb. Can you come by my office tomorrow morning? Caleb waited. I'd rather discuss it in person. What are we discussing? A decision. Caleb looked across the room. Lily was sitting at the dining table, carefully coloring a poster for school, completely unaware of who was on the phone. I'll come, Caleb replied. After the call ended, he didn't feel nervous. He didn't feel hopeful either. He simply understood that whatever Damien wanted, the meeting could no longer be about getting his old life back. That life was already gone. The real question was whether both of them had learned anything since the day a cardboard box slid across a polished conference table. Caleb arrived 10 minutes early. Old habits were hard to break. The receptionist recognized him immediately and offered the same polite smile she had given him for years, but this time there was uncertainty behind it. It's good to see you again, she said. You too. She handed him a visitor badge instead of the employee ID he used to wear every day. It was a small piece of plastic. It felt much heavier than it looked. Damien Blackwell's office hadn't changed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the distribution center. Hundreds of trailers moved in steady lines below, each one part of the machine Caleb had helped build. Damien stood by the glass with a cup of coffee. Thank you for coming. You said it was important. It is. They sat across from each other without shaking hands. For a moment neither man spoke. Finally Damien broke the silence. The rollout is still moving. I assumed it was. It hasn't been easy. Caleb simply nodded. I've also learned something since you left. Caleb waited. You weren't doing one job. No. You were doing pieces of several jobs. Because nobody else had the authority. Damien looked down briefly. Maybe. He slid a folder across the desk. I'd like you to come back. Caleb didn't touch it. The position is different. Damien continued. Higher salary. More authority. A seat on the Executive Operations Committee. Caleb remained quiet. Damien leaned forward. In return, we need stability. What does that mean? It means the transition created confusion. If you return and publicly support the new structure, confidence will return. Caleb looked directly at him. And if I don't support every decision? Damien answered without hesitation. Then we're back where we started. The room fell silent again. Caleb finally opened the folder. The compensation package was generous. Far beyond what the smaller logistics company could ever offer. Health insurance. Retirement contributions. Bonuses. Everything he had worried about over the past few weeks was sitting inside those pages. Then he reached the final section. The agreement stated that operational decisions made before his resignation had been based on recommendations from his department. Legal language? Carefully written. But clear enough. His signature would quietly place responsibility back onto him. He closed the folder. I can't sign this. Damien folded his hands. Because of pride? No. Then why? Because this document tells a story that isn't true. Damien studied him for several long seconds. You always make everything about principles. Caleb smiled gently. I used to think I did. Damien raised an eyebrow. What changed? I realized something after I left. Caleb's voice stayed calm. I spent years making decisions for everyone because I believed I was protecting them. He thought of Lily. Of the insurance letter. Of the notebook filled with free things that mattered more than money. I was wrong. Damien listened without interrupting. I should have trusted people enough to let them carry their share. He pushed the folder back across the desk. So I'm not coming back to carry everyone else's responsibility again. Damien looked disappointed, but not surprised. What if I asked you to explain that to the team? Caleb paused. Not to convince them to stay. Then why? So they can decide for themselves. That answer lingered in the room. An hour later, Caleb walked into the operations conference room where dozens of supervisors and coordinators had gathered. The news of his visit had spread quickly. Victoria stood near the back of the room. She crossed her arms, unsure what he intended to say. Caleb looked around at the familiar faces. Some had trained under him. Some had challenged him. Some had quietly depended on him. He took a slow breath. I owe all of you an apology. The room became completely still. I believed that taking every difficult decision myself was leadership. He shook his head. It wasn't. It meant I never gave many of you the chance to understand the risks, question the process, or make informed choices of your own. No one spoke. I left because I couldn't support a decision that crossed my line. He glanced toward Victoria. But leaving without preparing the people who would inherit that burden was my mistake. He placed several organized binders on the conference table. Everything I know about this operation is here. He looked around the room one last time. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. I'm here because every one of you deserves the same thing I finally gave my daughter. The truth. And the freedom to decide what comes next. The conference room stayed silent long after Caleb finished speaking. No one rushed toward the binders. No one applauded. For years, these supervisors had been trained to wait for instructions from someone above them. Making an independent decision felt almost unnatural. Caleb understood that feeling better than anyone. He had helped create it. Victoria stepped forward first. She picked up one of the binders and flipped through its tabs. Regional routing. Vendor escalations. Emergency override procedures. Seasonal staffing risks. Every section was organized in the same careful handwriting she had watched Caleb use for years. This isn't a resignation letter, she said quietly. Caleb shook his head. No. It's everything I should have shared long before I left. One supervisor looked up. So, what are you telling us to do? Caleb smiled faintly. I'm not telling you what to do. Several people exchanged confused looks. You all know the facts now. He rested both hands on the conference table. The decision belongs to each of you. The room became thoughtful instead of tense. That difference mattered. One by one, questions replaced fear. What happens if we refuse an approval? Can responsibilities be shared differently? Why are these exceptions handled by one manager? Instead of 2. Instead of answering every question himself, Caleb often replied with another question. What would make that decision safer? Who else should be involved? Who carries the consequences? For the first time in years, the meeting sounded less like a briefing and more like professionals solving problems together. Victoria watched the conversation unfold with quiet satisfaction. People who rarely spoke were contributing ideas. Junior supervisors were asking thoughtful questions. Experienced managers admitted they had signed documents in the past without fully understanding why. No one was looking for a hero anymore. They were looking for clarity. Late that afternoon, Victoria walked into Damien Blackwell's office carrying one of Caleb's binders. Damien looked up. I heard he gave everyone quite a speech. He gave them information. Same thing. No. She placed the binder on his desk. It's the opposite. Damien frowned. He didn't tell anyone which side to choose. He gave them enough facts to choose for themselves. Damien leaned back in his chair. And now they're questioning procedures. They're understanding procedures. They're slowing the company down. Victoria met his eyes. They're taking ownership. He remained silent. She continued. You've spent years expecting people to accept responsibility without giving them real authority. Damien folded his arms. And Caleb? He made the opposite mistake. That caught Damien's attention. He accepted too much authority without letting anyone share the responsibility. Victoria glanced toward the window overlooking the warehouse. Both approaches create dependence. The words lingered between them. Meanwhile, Caleb stopped by Lily's school to pick her up after an art club meeting. She climbed into the sedan carrying a cardboard model of a lighthouse. I made this for our history project. It's impressive. It leans a little. So do a lot of real lighthouses. She laughed. On the drive home, she looked over at him. Were you at your old office today? I was. Were you getting your job back? Caleb smiled. No. Are you sad? He thought carefully before answering. A little. She nodded. Can I tell you something? Always. I think I finally understand why you left. He glanced at her. You do? You didn't leave because you wanted a different job. No. You left because you wanted to be able to look in the mirror. Caleb felt his throat tighten. That's part of it. She looked out the window. But I think you came back today for a different reason. What reason? So nobody else has to figure everything out alone. He couldn't help smiling. I guess you're getting pretty good at reading people. I learned from you. Those 4 words stayed with him the rest of the evening. Not because they made him proud. Because they reminded him that children learn far more from what adults practiced than from what they preached. The next morning, Damien called an executive meeting. For the first time in anyone's memory, the agenda wasn't focused on quarterly numbers. Instead, stacks of handwritten questions from supervisors sat in front of every executive. Some challenged reporting structures. Others questioned approval chains. Several proposed shared accountability for high-risk operational decisions. One vice president spoke first. If we ignore all of these, people will stop trusting leadership. Another executive added. If we approve them all, decision-making becomes slower. Damien listened without interrupting. For years, people had entered this room waiting for his answers. Now they were asking him to reconsider the way authority itself was distributed. He finally understood something he had missed the day Caleb carried a cardboard box out of the building. Power could force compliance. It could purchase expertise. It could replace employees. But it could never buy genuine trust. And once people learned how to think for themselves, they rarely surrendered that freedom again. 3 months later, the apartment felt smaller than the house they had left behind. The living room doubled as a homework station, a movie theater, and sometimes a place where pizza dough covered every available surface. The kitchen had barely enough room for 2 people to cook together, but somehow Caleb and Lily bumped into each other so often that they laughed. More than they argued. The move hadn't been easy. Packing the old house had brought back memories of Lily's mother, birthdays celebrated in the backyard, and the tiny pencil marks on a bedroom wall that measured how much Lily had grown each year. Instead of pretending those memories didn't matter, Caleb had let Lily choose what came with them. She carefully removed the measuring strip from the wall before the painters arrived. At the new apartment, she taped it beside her bedroom door. "It still counts," she said proudly. "It absolutely does," Caleb replied. A week later, Caleb accepted the position with the regional logistics company that had interviewed him earlier. The paycheck was smaller. The office was smaller. Even the parking lot was smaller. But when his manager handed him the employee handbook, she smiled and said, "Around here, nobody solves problems alone. If something affects the whole team talks about it." Caleb smiled back. "I think I'm going to like it here." He still missed parts of his old career. He missed the complexity. He missed mentoring younger managers. He even missed the challenge of solving problems that seemed impossible. But he no longer missed carrying everything by himself. Across town, Blackwell Logistics had changed in quieter ways. No headlines announced a corporate revolution. No television cameras appeared outside headquarters. Most customers never noticed anything had changed at all. Inside the company, however, every major operational decision now required documented review from multiple departments before implementation. Managers were expected to question proposals instead of simply approving them. Responsibility and authority finally began moving together. Victoria Sloan remained Director of Regional Operations. She had earned Damien Blackwell's respect without ever asking for it. One afternoon, she stopped outside his office after a leadership meeting. "You've been unusually quiet lately," she said. Damien looked out the window toward the loading docks. "I used to think strong leaders had all the answers. And now? I think strong leaders ask whether the right people are in the room before making the decision." Victoria smiled. "That's a better place to start." He nodded. "So was Whitmore right?" She considered the question. "Not completely." Damien looked surprised. "He was right to leave." She paused. "But he was also right to come back and finish the conversation." For the first time in a long while, Damien didn't try to defend himself. He simply accepted the truth. On Friday evening, Caleb arrived home carrying a small paper bag from the grocery store. Lily peeked inside. "Chocolate chip cookie dough? I figured experimental pizza deserved some competition." She laughed. As they baked cookies, flour ended up on the counter, the floor, and somehow even on the dog from next door that had wandered in through the open patio door. They laughed until their sides hurt. Later that night, they carried 2 warm cookies onto the apartment balcony. The city lights stretched quietly across the horizon. Not as impressive as the view from their old house. Still beautiful. Lily leaned against her father's shoulder. "Do you ever wish you hadn't quit?" Caleb thought for a long moment before answering. "I wish some parts had been easier." She nodded. "But I don't wish I had stayed." "Because of your boss?" He smiled gently. "No. Because leaving forced me to learn something I should have known a long time ago." "What was that?" He looked at his daughter. "Being a good father doesn't mean carrying every burden by yourself. It means trusting the people you love enough to carry part of it with you." Lily slipped her hand into his. "I can do that. I know." They sat together in comfortable silence while the last light faded beyond the rooftops. Months earlier, one cardboard box had seemed to mark the end of everything Caleb had built. Now he understood it had simply marked the moment he stopped measuring success by the weight he could carry alone. The greatest thing he had given his daughter wasn't financial security, a perfect home, or a flawless future. It was the courage to tell the truth, the humility to admit when he was wrong, and the trust to let the people he loved walk beside him instead of always behind him. Sometimes the strongest families aren't the ones that never lose anything. They're the ones that learn no one has to carry the future alone.